Mae Lawson sat in the driver's seat of their black SUV, her fingers drumming on the steering wheel. Hugo, her husband and the co-founder of Beyond the Veil Investigations, was in the passenger seat, an expression of concern on his face. It was a crisp afternoon in the city of Hope's Gate, and a gentle drizzle had begun to fall. Hugo finally put his phone away and glanced at Mae. "He should have been here by now," he said. Mae nodded, her dark eyes scanning the surroundings. "Think we got punked?" she asked. "The guy was very convincing," Hugo responded. "There was no way he could have guessed those things. I don't even know how he got my number." The man had been exceptionally secretive when he spoke to Hugo over the phone the day before, making it clear that he didn't want to be seen together in public, although he felt it probably didn't matter in the long run. The rest of Mae and Hugo's team were currently working a separate case, one they had been excited about attending themselves, but the mysterious caller's urgency and their own curiosity led them to accept this clandestine meeting. Suddenly, a man appeared out of the misty rain, his features obscured by a black hoodie pulled low over his face. He approached the vehicle, glancing around nervously before opening the rear door and slipping inside. Mae and Hugo shared a tense look before Mae started the engine, pulling away from the curb. Hugo placed his digital voice recorder on the center console and started recording. "Why the secrecy?" Hugo asked, keeping his voice low. The man shifted uncomfortably in the back seat. "You must understand," he began. "They can have eyes and ears anywhere. You'll never know when they're listening, when they're watching. I'm certain they knew I was meeting you. There's no way they didn't." He paused, closing his eyes. "And I'll die for it. Probably today." Mae and Hugo looked at each other. Whether the man was right or just crazy, he, at the very least, seemed to believe what he was saying. "So, once again," said Hugo, "why the secrecy?" The man chuckled to himself, staring out the window, and said, "I figured I might as well try." Mae's grip on the steering wheel tightened as she navigated the damp streets. "Well," she started, "if you've already involved us in something dangerous, you may as well go ahead and tell us what you know." The man sighed, preparing himself to pass the point of no return. "I know how this is all going to sound," he said, "but I need you to just listen." He leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "There are people, a nameless group, no more than 100 total." Then with another sigh, he said, "These people are able to breach the threshold between our realm and others. They refer to this threshold as the lacuna. It's an interstitial space that looks like our reality, only it's dead. Nothing lives there, at least nothing that wasn't put there by these people." Mae and Hugo sat silently, taking in the man's words, taken aback by their absurdity. He held up a hand, as if to ask them to hold their comments and questions for the end of his presentation. "From this space," he continued, "they can peer into our reality at any point in time. And there are others, people with a greater power, with unnatural abilities, who are helping them achieve their goals." "What kind of power?" Hugo inquired, his curiosity piqued. "Unimaginable," the man replied. "These individuals can step in and out of time, through the lacuna, and there's at least one who can manipulate reality itself, bending it to his will." "And what is their goal?" asked Hugo. The man shook his head and said, "That much only they know." "Why tell us?" Mae asked, her eyes focused on the road. She wasn't buying any of this, and she suspected neither was Hugo, although it would make for a good story. "At first I just wanted out," the man said, "and I wanted to tell the world what they were doing. But now—" He trailed off, hesitant to finish. "What is it?" asked Hugo. "Now I know there's no way out," the man said, his voice trembling. "Now I believe they wanted you to know." "What makes you think that?" asked Mae. "Because I'm not dead yet," the man answered. The vehicle slowed to a stop in an isolated alley. Hugo couldn't help but scoff. "This is sounding like some kind of Illuminati nonsense. I'm expecting you to tell us they're trying to bring about the Antichrist or something." The man shook his head, his tone serious. "His fate is already written," he said. "These people see themselves as existing outside of fate, and they have their own vessel, the one we're the most afraid of." Mae glanced at Hugo, her brow furrowed. "How do you know any of this?" The man hesitated before answering. "My parents were deeply entangled with this group before they passed, and I remained trapped within the system for years afterward, unsure of how to escape. I finally realized this is my only way out." The weight of the information hung heavily in the vehicle as Mae and Hugo silently processed it all. The man opened the door suddenly, preparing to leave. Mae and Hugo exchanged uneasy glances, still skeptical. "If what you say is true," Hugo said, his voice laced with doubt, "then prove it." The man closed the door again. He remained silent for a moment, contemplating how to provide the proof that Hugo and Mae demanded. He had shown immense courage by even sharing this information with them, but he understood their skepticism. He leaned closer, lowered his voice, and took a deep breath. "I'll prove it to you, but I warn you, it won't be pleasant." He sighed again, preparing himself for what he was about to reveal. "The rest of your team," he said, "they're on another case, right? Barley House?" Mae and Hugo's eyes widened, and a chilling silence settled in the car. The man's words hung heavily in the air. He swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "I'm truly sorry to have to tell you this, but 2 of your friends have just died." Hugo's face was a mix of anger, fear, and disbelief. "How do you know this?" The man looked out the window, his expression one of profound sadness. "Because they always know," he said. Without another word, the man opened the car door and stepped out onto the cold pavement. He closed the door behind him, leaving Mae and Hugo sitting in stunned silence. Coming to his senses, Hugo grabbed his phone to call his teammates. The moment the call was answered, Hugo knew what the man had told them was true. The following evening, Mae and Hugo sat in their living room, haunted by the weight of what they had learned and the loss they had already suffered. Their friends' deaths had shaken them deeply, and now, knowing they could be targets of this enigmatic group, they felt the threat looming over them like a storm on the horizon. They had a difficult decision to make as well. They had set out to obtain a great new story for fans of their show. But with the thought that this dangerous group could really be out there, and the possibility that they actually wanted Mae and Hugo to release the story for some dark purpose, they were no longer sure if they should. Hugo's gaze was fixed on the TV, the volume muted, as he aimlessly flipped through news channels. The room was filled with heavy silence, both of them too wrapped up in their thoughts to utter a word. Then, Hugo's hand stilled on the remote control, his eyes narrowing as the image on the screen held his attention. It was a news report. The camera focused on a street corner in Hope's Gate, where police officers were cordoning off a crime scene. An ominous chill crept over Hugo, and he turned up the volume. "Another tragic incident in the city," the news anchor reported, her tone somber. "A local man identified as Peter Eddington was found dead in what appears to be a mugging." Mae shifted closer to Hugo, her eyes fixed on the screen, which now showed the victim's face. "Peter Eddington," she whispered. "It's him," Hugo confirmed, his voice hollow. The news segment showed images of the crime scene, illuminated by the glare of police lights. Mae and Hugo's home felt darker now, as if a shadow had enveloped them. They exchanged a fearful glance, realizing that their lives had irrevocably changed, and they were no longer just investigators of the paranormal. They were now entangled in something far more sinister. As they watched the report on the whistleblower's death, they couldn't help but think of the last words he had spoken to them. Their thoughts were haunted by the question, what did this group want with them, and what role had they unwillingly been cast into? Their lives were now a complex web of mystery, danger, and an ever-encroaching darkness.